Hello, ladies and gentle nerds. It is Graham, also known as Hamhocks42 on the internet, and it is time for another edition of Overthinking MTG. So, as always, I am out on Gatherer, which is the official database for Magic the Gathering, and I'm going to go ahead and select a random card using everybody's favorite feature, which is appropriately named random card, and I'm going to talk about it for the next 10 minutes at least. I don't know if if I get on a roll, if I find something really tasty, who knows? I might be here for another hour. I wouldn't count on that. But yeah, nice short commute for sure. Anyway, let's go ahead and get to it. All right, so it is loading. Dismal Backwater is the card that we got, specifically the M20 version. So this is pretty nice. It is a land. So pretty straightforward, and it's a common land, so not one of the ones that's worth an obscene amount of money. No, it's a common land that enters the battlefield tapped, and when it does, you gain one life. So it enters the battlefield, you gain a life. All right, neat. Nothing wrong with that. One life doesn't really do a whole lot, but it's something. And more importantly, Dismal Backwater taps for one blue and a black. So it is a Dimir dual land that comes in tapped. So not one of the good dual lands, but it's serviceable nonetheless. So it's kind of the budget version of dual lands, and I find it very interesting that something like this exists in the meta right now as a common that is standard legal, that's available to everybody, and it's worth, I don't know, 10 cents, maybe a nickel. It's all over the place. It's a common after all. So right now you can get a pack of M20. You have a really good chance. I mean, well, a decent chance of pulling this card. It's as good as anything in the set. It's not, it's just a common. And I find that really funny when you compare it to cycles like the invasion dual lands that were tap lands like this that came in tapped, and you couldn't, there was no way to bring them in untapped. One of the things that makes cards like the shock lands interesting, the black blue equivalent being Watery Grave. If you look at that, it's a black blue land that comes into play tapped, or you could take 2 damage and let it come in untapped. And the truth is, an untapped land versus a tapped land is way better than no damage versus 2 damage. Shocking yourself for an untapped land rather than having a tapped land is worth it 90% of the time. The only time you wouldn't do that is if just didn't have anything to play in those colors anyway in your hand. But most of the time you want to build your decks in such a way that you're going to be able to curve out and hit every single land drop and every single, make take advantage of all of the mana that you have at your disposal. That's generally how you want to do it. So lands like this that come into play tapped regardless are very detrimental for creating that tempo and creating that kind of pattern of play where you can get the maximum value on every single one of your turns. The fact that you have to effectively miss a land drop in one turn in order to play something like this, which, if you're playing in like a multiplayer format, or you're playing in a group of friends where the meta is such that the games are slower because maybe more people are playing with these. Maybe you're playing with a bunch of friends, none of whom have the kind of money to really spend on expensive mana bases. And so this is the type of land that is running around in your meta. That's fine. Actually, in that case, Dismal Backwater and its cycle where they gain life, actually, you get a little bit of upside with it. Meanwhile, your friend is playing Salt Marsh, which was an uncommon back in Invasion, and he's going, what the hell? Yours is significantly better than mine. And which also speaks to the power creep. Right now, we're seeing a situation where cards that are being printed today are just as powerful, or sometimes even more powerful than cards that were printed in Legacy. Whereas cards that were printed back in the 90s and in the 2000s, some cards that were considered very powerful then and have even been recently very powerful and very playable are now being eclipsed by cards that we're seeing in today's booster packs. And so the fact that something like this is a throwaway common that's barely worth a nickel is really a testament, I think, to how the game has shifted and how perceptions have shifted. And I don't know, I think it's an interesting little case study when you look at it, because this card on its face is unquestionably better than a card like Saltmarsh, which is just a black blue dual land that comes into play tapped. That's all it is. And I'll tell you right now, I have Salt Marsh in I think two of my commander decks, because I had them. I had them lying around, and they're commander decks, so they're not overly, um, they're not super competitive. Well, my commander decks aren't super competitive, I should say. I love building goofy jank, and I'm not going to spend extra money on expensive mana bases. I'm just not going to. I'm not trying to win any tournaments. I'm not trying to set the world on fire. If I have to wait a turn to play my Victimize, I will, and I'm not going to freak out about it. If I have to wait a turn and I don't get to opt on turn one or hit my serum visions right away, I'm not going to freak out. And if, you know, e- on Arena, I actually had a couple of decks that ran these, but as quickly as I had the wild cards, I made sure to get the Watery Graves and cycle Dismal Backwater out, because in that situation, it didn't cost money. It cost wild cards. And the wild cards were time that I had invested effectively. And making sure in that context to get the best ones, that mattered, because I want that deck, because I'm playing in standard where it's 60 cards, it's one on one, it's more competitive. In that situation, I want the best lands, especially because they didn't cost any money. Now, I'm not going to be building paper standard decks anytime soon, because I don't have that kind of money. It's that simple. I just can't afford it. If I could, I probably would. And then cards that cycled out, I would get in on Pioneer and that kind of thing. And if you're out there and you're doing that, great. If you want to participate in those events, or you want to participate in those formats, and you know you're not going to produce the top tier decks, and you want to find some budget versions of those, cards like this that come into play tapped. The difference between a land coming into play tapped and a land coming into play untapped, if you are going for, if you're going for the Mythic Championship trophy, that makes all the difference. And that is absolutely worth, the 30, 40, $50 difference. That might be a little extreme, but it's worth spending the extra 10, 15, $20 to make sure that the lands that you're playing can come into play untapped. If you're playing with your friends and you're looking to have a good time and you're trying to just enjoy yourself playing a card game, which I think we should all do. I think everybody should be having fun. It's a game. That's why we're here. If you're going to have fun being able to throw out, stuff on turn five, six, seven, the big haymakers, the goofy combos, that type of stuff, and you're not necessarily as concerned about winning games consistently, save the money. Go over to TCG Player, or Card Kingdom, or wherever your single seller of choice, or go to your local game store. They probably have a whole pile of these sitting around, and it's going to cost you $1, and you're probably going to get 12 of them. So, do that. Get your hands on lands like this that will allow you to create a 3, 4 color or 5 color deck that is going to be more consistent in the late game than it would be otherwise. Whereas, yeah, that's okay. If you want to have access to those colors so you can create different types of combinations and leverage different types of multicolored cards, then the inexpensive dual lands like this is going to get you there. That is what is going to enable those 3 or 4 color commander decks to have those big plays in the end of, late in the game, that require 3 different colors of mana in order to fire off. You're going to be able to get that with cards like this, and it's going to cost you pennies on the dollar. So if you're looking for a budget commander build, these things are great. If you're looking for, um, well, and actually, also, if you're looking for a set where you can get your hands on just decent utility pieces like this, M20 actually has a fair amount. So you might, especially if you're building anything with elementals, there's all kinds of good stuff in there. Um, yeah, it's funny. I feel like that set has aged pretty well, because when it first came out, I remember doing a couple of drafts on Arena, kind of going, "This is it, really?" And I cracked an Agent of Treachery pack one, pick one, first pack in the set. And I remember just reading that card going like, you're coming with me. And I was not wrong, and I've used it a lot ever since then. Yeah. When Agent of Treachery and Blood for Bones came together, it was a beautiful union. But I digress. Anyway, M20 is actually a pretty decent set. Over time, I feel like those cards have aged very well, and the limited environment felt kind of lame at the time. But I think it's because all of the mechanics within that set were just solid. Like there wasn't a lot of amazing cards that really exploded. Like there were a couple that were pretty decent. Agent of Treachery comes to mind, Dracuseth, but even then, those aren't super expensive bombs right now. They're decent role players for what they are, which is great. And M20 is full of that. So like here's a great example. This land, Dismal Backwater, it comes into play tapped, you gain a life, it produces two different colors. If you're playing blue black and it's any kind of deck that is relatively slow, you can afford to miss some of those drops. I also find it really funny that the one life gain here is valued so much lower when you compare it to the Temple cycle, which they actually just recently printed some in Theros Beyond Death. Recently, as I record this, I should say. And it is actually January 30th, 2020, as I'm recording this, just to go ahead and just timestamp the ever loving piss out of it. So when you look at the Scry lands, the temples, they come into play tapped. They produce two colors, but you get to scry one. So you get to look at the top card of your library and either let it stay the top card of your library or put it on the bottom. So it helps smooth out your draws. And that is worth so much more than life gain that the temples, many of which actually came out initially in M20, this exact same set, they were rares. And those rares are now valued at, $5, $6 a pop. Different color combinations are going to be different, varying degrees of expense based on the metas, of course, but they're worth significantly more. Meanwhile, Dismal Backwater and the whole cycle where you gain life when they come into play tapped are worth nothing because they don't add consistency to the deck. They gain you one life, which in crazy situations, that one life might be the difference between losing on a particular turn and losing on the next turn, but it's not worth a lot. Most of the time, if your opponent has lethal, one damage isn't going to make that big of a difference. We've all seen those crazy situations where it does, but crazy situations are not what make being good in crazy situations does not make a card good. Being good in any situation makes a card good. And in this situation, Dismal Backwater and its like are significantly less good than the Scry lands simply because both will always come into play tapped. You cannot bring them into play untapped in any way that I'm aware of anyway. There may be some weird interaction where you could, but in generally speaking, they come into play tapped. They produce two mana. That's the part you really care about. But scrying one is worth about $7 or $8, where gaining one life is worth about 5 cents. And I think that's fair. And that's about right. And it's an interesting testament to the value of consistency. And that's really what it comes down to. That's something that I've learned over time as I've looked at what makes Magic cards good. The reason that Scalding Tarn can be worth $100, depending on, where the market is when you look at it, is because it helps make any deck that is running blue and red, or blue or red, or any third color for that matter. It allows any deck that is running any combination of those colors to be significantly more consistent. That's what people are paying for when they shell out $100 for one little strip of cardboard. It's consistency. Far and away, top to bottom, is consistency. And the reason that cards like Dismal Backwater here are not worth a ton is because they do not help bring much consistency to the mix. Now, that said, it's worth more than a basic land. Actually, it's actually valued around the same as a lot of basic lands, which is kind of shocking when you think about it. Actually, there are a number of basic lands, like the full art lands from Unstable, for example, that are worth way more than this. But that's because the art is amazing. But they were a limited run, so that's supply and demand at work there. And just because John Avon is just a badass artist, and anything he touches is going to be great. Um, but yeah, I could also go off on a whole tangent about magic artists. Don't worry, we'll get there. But this cards like this, lands that come into play tapped that produce multiple mana, do help bring consistency in the mana fixing that they provide for late in the game. But that comes at the cost of being able to curve out early. Dropping this on your first turn means that's all you did. It doesn't matter if you have a card that's only worth one, you cannot play it. If you have a card that's worth two and so you have to time how you play these lands, and it adds a level of complexity and potentially a level of frustration that you'd probably rather not deal with. And that's fair. And again, that's why it's worth about 5 cents. So this has been Dismal Backwater. It's late. I'm starting to lose my voice because I actually hung out with my dad earlier today, and we got talking a whole lot because I love talking about magic. And my dad is very patient and loves, loves me because he's a good father. But on top of that, he doesn't mind me chatting about magic and lets me go, and it's fun. Anyway, thank you so much for hanging out. Dismal Backwater, decent card. If you crack it in a pack and you have a commander deck or a casual kind of situation where it can be useful, rock on, do it up. There's use for it. There's the right place for it. Um, and it is a useful role player in the right kind of casual format. If you are hoping to play competitively, this just isn't a card for you. And we're going to see that a lot as we go look through random cards, because 90 to 98% of the cards that have been printed are not optimized for competitive play. They just aren't. You know, bulk is bulk for a reason. We have bulk commons because they print a lot of them. And yeah, and so that's what we're going to end up talking about a lot here, just by virtue of probability. So anyway, this has been Dismal Backwater. It has been Thursday night. It is late here where I'm recording this. It is some other time where you are, somewhere in the future, perhaps far into the future. And I hope you're having a great time. And I hope you're having a good day. And I hope that you have a great day tomorrow and the day after that, etc., etc. I also stream, by the way. I'm live every weekday morning from 5:30 to 6:30 Eastern Time because I am a psychopath. And that is actually also my morning workout. If you're wondering what the hell that means, please come hang out and check it out. You can also see replays of any of my streams. It is 1 hour every single weekday morning. Again, 5:30 to 6:30 at twitch.tv/hamhocks42. Please come over and hang out. We have a lot of fun over on that channel. And yeah, I hope you have a good one, and I will catch you tomorrow. Later.